For 7 seconds, nothing happened. Bruce Lee just looked. The host froze. And the entire studio held its breath. It was March 1971. Los Angeles. Cab Studios. The Pierre Berton Show. A live television interview broadcast across North America. Bruce Lee had been invited to discuss his new television project, a concept he'd been developing about a Shaolin monk wandering the American West. The show that would eventually become Kung Fu, though Bruce would never star in it. Pierre Berton was a respected Canadian journalist. Sharp. Articulate. Known for asking tough questions. He'd interviewed everyone, politicians, authors, celebrities. He had a reputation for controlling his interviews, for steering conversations where he wanted them to go. Bruce sat in the guest chair wearing his signature black Chinese collar shirt. Relaxed but alert. His posture perfect. Hands resting calmly on the armrests. He'd been answering Berton's questions about martial arts philosophy, about the difference between classical technique and practical application. You see, Bruce was saying, his voice calm and measured, the classical man is just a bundle of routine, ideas, and traditions. If you follow the classical pattern, you are understanding the routine, the tradition, the shadow. You are not understanding yourself. Berton interrupted. But surely, the host said, leaning forward with his microphone, speaking over Bruce's last words, surely there's value in tradition. These techniques have been refined over centuries. He stopped. Not because he'd finished his thought. He stopped because Bruce Lee had turned his head slightly and was now looking directly at him with an expression that wasn't anger, wasn't aggression, but something far more powerful. Complete presence. Bruce didn't raise his voice. Didn't gesture. Didn't move except for that slight turn of his head. His eyes locked onto Berton's with an intensity that seemed to freeze time itself. The studio went silent. Bruce didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Second one, Berton's mouth was still half open, his question unfinished, hanging in the air. His hand holding the microphone stayed frozen mid-gesture. Second two, the camera operators noticed. One shifted slightly, unsure whether to zoom in or hold the wide shot. The technical director in the control room later said he felt the temperature in the booth drop. Second three, Bruce still hadn't moved. Still hadn't spoken. Just that unwavering gaze. Calm. Controlled. Absolutely present. Second four, Berton's other hand, which had been resting on his desk, slowly withdrew. His body language shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle lean backward, creating distance. Second five, someone in the studio crew coughed. The sound seemed obscenely loud in the silence. Every person in that studio, cameramen, sound technicians, makeup artists, the handful of producers watching from the wings, felt it. Something had shifted. Second six, Bruce's expression hadn't changed. No anger. No frustration. Just complete, focused attention on the man who had interrupted him. His breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved. Second seven, Berton broke. I apologize, he said quietly, his confident interviewer persona completely gone, replaced by something genuine. Please! Continue your thought. Bruce held the gaze for one more heartbeat. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to the camera and continued exactly where he'd been interrupted. As I was saying, if you follow the classical pattern, you are understanding the routine, the tradition, the shadow. You are not understanding yourself. The interview continued. But everyone in that studio knew something had happened. Something that couldn't quite be explained but could definitely be felt. To understand those 7 seconds, you need to understand what happened 3 weeks earlier. Bruce Lee had been struggling for years in Hollywood. He'd created the concept for Kung Fu. He'd written treatments. He'd pitched the show to every network. And every network had told him the same thing. American audiences wouldn't accept an Asian man as the lead in a Western television series. They loved his ideas. They wanted his expertise. They'd even hired him as a consultant. But star in the show? That role went to David Carradine, a white actor who would wear makeup and play the Chinese character Bruce had created. The rejection stung deeper than any punch Bruce had ever taken in a ring. Not because of ego. Because of what it represented. The invisible barrier that said he could create art but not embody it. He could teach but not perform. He could choreograph fights but not star in them. Pierre Berton's show was supposed to be different. A serious interview. A chance to discuss philosophy, not just demonstrate kicks. A platform to be seen as a thinker, not just a martial artist. But even before the cameras rolled, Bruce sensed a familiar pattern. The way Berton had greeted him, warm but slightly condescending, like someone meeting an interesting curiosity rather than an equal. The way the questions were framed, always pushing Bruce toward the exotic, the foreign, the other. Tell us about these ancient Chinese secrets. Explain this mysterious Eastern philosophy. Show us some of those incredible moves. Bruce had dealt with this his entire career. The reduction of his life's work to performance. The assumption that martial arts was spectacle rather than science. The constant interruptions, as if his words were less important than the next question. When Berton interrupted him mid-sentence, it wasn't the interruption itself that triggered those 7 seconds. It was everything that interruption represented. 20 years of being talked over. A lifetime of being seen but not heard. Decades of having his knowledge extracted but his voice silenced. And in that moment, Bruce Lee made a choice. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. He didn't shout. Didn't argue. Didn't lecture about respect or protocol. Instead, he did what he'd spent his entire life mastering. He controlled the space through pure presence. Those 7 seconds were a demonstration more powerful than any physical technique. They proved what Bruce had been trying to explain all along, that real power isn't loud, isn't aggressive, isn't about force. Real power is about complete control. Of yourself. Of the moment. Of the energy in a room. After the interview, the crew talked about those 7 seconds for weeks. They couldn't quite articulate what had happened. Some said Bruce had done something with his eyes. Others swore the temperature in the studio had actually dropped. A camera operator insisted he'd felt pressure in his chest, like the air itself had gotten heavier. Pierre Berton never spoke publicly about the moment. But people who knew him said something changed that day. In his subsequent interviews, and he conducted thousands more before he died, he never again interrupted a guest mid-sentence. Never again assumed his question was more important than someone's answer. The interview footage became legendary in martial arts circles. Not for any demonstrations of technique. Not for any spectacular moves. But for those 7 seconds when Bruce Lee stopped time with nothing but presence. A young filmmaker named Robert Klaus saw that interview. He would later direct Enter the Dragon, the film that would make Bruce Lee a global icon. Klaus said that watching those 7 seconds convinced him that Bruce didn't need to fight on screen to command attention. Just being Bruce Lee was enough. Away from the cameras, Bruce made a choice no one expected. After the interview wrapped, Bruce didn't leave immediately. He waited while the crew broke down the set, coiling cables, shutting down lights. Pierre Berton was in his dressing room, reviewing notes for his next interview. Bruce walked to the dressing room and knocked. Berton opened the door, clearly surprised. "Mr. Lee? I thought you'd left. May I come in?" Berton stepped aside, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been on camera with politicians and prime ministers. Bruce closed the door behind him. For a moment, he just stood there, and Berton felt that same presence he'd experienced during those 7 seconds. But this time, without cameras, without an audience, it felt even more intense. "I need you to understand something," Bruce said quietly. "When you interrupted me, you weren't just interrupting a sentence. You were continuing a pattern that has defined my entire career in this country. The pattern of being seen as interesting but not important. Exotic but not equal." Berton started to apologize again, but Bruce raised a hand gently. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you this because you have power. Your show reaches millions of people. And every time you interrupt someone, every time you assume your question is more valuable than their answer, you're telling your audience that some voices matter more than others. He pulled something from his pocket. A business card. On it, just his name and a phone number. I'm giving you this not because I want to be on your show again. I'm giving you this because I want you to call me the next time you're about to interview someone who looks like me, sounds like me, comes from where I come from. I want you to remember those 7 seconds. And I want you to ask yourself, am I listening, or am I just waiting to talk? Bruce placed the card on Berton's dressing table and left. But what followed would stay with everyone who witnessed it, forever. Pierre Berton kept that card for the rest of his life. It sat in his wallet, right behind his press credentials. His daughter found it after he died in 2004, more than 3 decades after that interview. The card was worn, the edges soft from years of handling, like something carried and touched frequently. In 1973, 2 years after the interview, Bruce Lee died suddenly in Hong Kong at the age of 32. The world lost him just as it was beginning to truly see him. But those 7 seconds lived on. Film students study that interview not for the words Bruce spoke, but for what he demonstrated without speaking. The power of controlled presence. The strength in stillness. The way true authority doesn't need to announce itself, it simply is. Young actors watch it to understand screen presence. Martial artists study it to grasp what Bruce meant when he said, "Be water, adaptable but powerful, calm but unstoppable." Teachers show it to explain the difference between reacting and responding. The interview has been viewed millions of times. People leave comments. I felt that through the screen. That's what real power looks like. 7 seconds that teach more than most people learn in a lifetime. But here's what most people don't know. 6 months after Bruce died, Pierre Berton received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph from the interview. The exact moment of those 7 seconds, Bruce looking directly at the camera with that unwavering presence, Berton frozen mid-interruption. On the back, in handwriting Berton didn't recognize, was a quote from Bruce Lee. Absorb what is useful. Reject what is useless. Add what is specifically your own. Berton framed that photograph. It hung in his office for the rest of his career. And before every interview, he would look at it and remember. Listening is more powerful than talking. Silence can teach more than words. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop and pay attention. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The business card. The photograph. The 7 seconds. They're not just artifacts of a television interview. They're reminders of what Bruce Lee spent his short life trying to teach. That real strength isn't about overpowering others, it's about mastering yourself. That true authority doesn't need to be loud. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be completely, utterly present. In 7 seconds, Bruce Lee didn't just stop an interruption. He demonstrated a principle that would outlive him by generations. The quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Pierre Berton never interrupted another guest. The business card stayed in his wallet until he died. The photograph hung in his office as a daily reminder. And those 7 seconds? They became proof of what Bruce had been teaching all along. You don't need to raise your fist to command respect. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to be completely, unshakably present. That's the lesson Bruce Lee left on a television stage in 1971. Not with a punch. Not with a kick. With 7 seconds of absolute control. The real fight isn't with your opponent. It's with yourself. And Bruce Lee won that fight every single day.